So today we're going to be making a box, and I've got here just a blank birch plywood box, and the idea is that we're going to take this painting that I did of our local beach area, and we're going to end up with the box on top covered in resin, and then the box eventually will be filled with lovely stationery goodies. So what I'm going to do first of all is take off the hardware, so all the latches and the hinges, and then I'm going to cover it in some Dulux eggshell paint just to give it a base coat and to sort out any imperfections. And what I would suggest is when you take off the hardware, put them all somewhere safely. Learn from me, kids. I lose screws all over the place, so it's a good idea just to keep them all safely in one place and maybe label them for the box that you're going to do. So here I am just undoing the screws, and I'm going to put them in the box and then that will be the lid that is now free. Okay, so we've got our box lid. We're just going to take a sanding block and just going to give it a rub down, so it's just a medium grit sandpaper. We're just going to take off any imperfections, any little burrs or anything, just so it makes it easier to sand and it's a much nicer surface to work on, and it's easier then when you lay the resin down too. So now we're giving it a coat of the Dulux eggshell quick dry satin, and I've done that, and all I've done is taped up the edges with some green frog tape. I do find that that's the very best tape. You actually want to get underneath as well, because when we put the resin on it will drip, and you don't want those drips to go underneath. They're very difficult to get off once they're on there. What I've done with this picture is I've actually scanned it and printed it out onto some different paper, and then I've given it a varnish, just a spray varnish, both front and back, just to help to protect the paper and to form a barrier so that the resin doesn't seep underneath once we put it down. It's quite important that you do that. If you just lay watercolour paper straight down, you'll find that the resin goes underneath and it gives it sort of a greasy look and feel, which isn't ideal. So what we've got here is just some Nouveau white glue, which I'm just going to pop on the top, and I'm just going to spread that all over. I particularly like this glue. And then what you need to do is to make sure that you get the edges particularly well stuck down. You really don't want resin seeping underneath. So I am just making sure that all of the edges are done. And I think, I just spot another little spot there that needs doing. There we are, so the box is nicely covered in glue. You can use Mod Podge or whatever your glue of choice is. And then we're going to pop the picture on top, making sure to line it up. I think I changed my mind here and decided that it wasn't quite where I wanted it, so I'll just lift that up in a second and reposition. Obviously you want to make sure that all of the edges of the box are covered. There we go. So what I'm going to do in a minute is to put some acetate down over the top, just a clear sheet of acetate, and then normally I would brayer that over with an ink brayer, just to make sure that everything is rolled down and stuck correctly. Mine was playing hide and seek with me, so I just use my hands for this. So I'm just going to spread it all out and just make sure that we've got good contact everywhere. And then you want to make sure that this is completely dry before you do anything else at all. It's really important, otherwise you'll have a reaction with the resin. So I've just reached around me for a heavy book of dyes, and then I'm going to pop that on top. I'm just going to leave that for a little while to dry. And then by the magic of television, any second now. Oh, and we're back. There we go. So I'm just going to get rid of that heavy book of dyes. That's had a good couple of hours to dry. And take off the acetate. And you can see that that's all stuck down. I'm happy with that. So now what we need to do is take off as much of the excess as we can, just with scissors. I just speeded that up. So now we've got a sort of a rough cut, and now we need to take off the rest of the overhang. So I'm just using a sanding block here. So you can use a nail file or sandpaper, and if you just rub sort of downwards, that will get rid of any excess eventually as it breaks the fibres of the paper apart, and you can just peel off the excess strips. Yeah, I was just testing it there just to see if it had broken enough, and it hadn't. So eventually it does. And it's actually quite satisfying when it does all come off. So now we're ready for the next step, which is resin. And if you've never seen resin before, it's quite exciting. So this is the 2-part epoxy resin from a company called Resin, and this is measured by weight. And I know from experience that I need 50 grams of this altogether, and this is a 1-to-1 epoxy, so it's 25 grams of part A, 25 grams of part B, which is the hardener. I think I'm out by about a gram. And then it needs to be stirred for 4 minutes, so I like to put Uptown Funk on and stir to Uptown Funk for 4 minutes. And then once it's stirred, we've got our box lid back, and it's on the cake turntable and a silicone mat. So all I'm going to do is take that mixed up resin, and I'm going to pour over a bit like drizzling icing. And it's a bit like a honey consistency. So what you want to do is to make sure that it's spread as evenly as possible. Well, this takes quite a long time, so there's quite a lot of footage of this. And that machine there is it's a craft heat gun. And what that does is that disperses any bubbles on the surface. Resin is very prone to getting particles of dust in here and goodness knows what in, so I've just gone around with a toothpick picking those out. And I find it really useful as well to have a light shining on it and to try and move the light around and to see where they are. Now I know as well that it normally takes at least 2 or 3 layers, so what I'll do is put the first layer on. There we go, I'm just moving the light there just so that I can get a better look and see quite where all the dust bunnies are and where the edges are always something that needs special attention. So I'm just making sure that we have enough resin on the edges, picking out any specks of dust, moving over any fish eyes, which is where the resin doesn't want to settle. So this will have another layer. We'll need to leave this to dry for a minimum of 12 hours, but I like to leave it probably 16 to 18. And then it needs to be covered with a box as well, because we need to keep the dust out as it dries. Also needs to be kept in a dry place with an even temperature. The hot weather we've been having lately isn't great for resin because it can make it not cure properly, which obviously isn't great. And you can see me just going around just picking bits out. This is very time consuming, this part, and quite heartbreaking because I know that in the morning I shall just have to give it a slight sand and do it again. There's my husband very helpfully pointing out something that he could see that I couldn't. I'm just giving it another blast with the heat gun, which can help to blow some of the resin into places where it might be a bit thinner, and also to get rid of some of the surface bubbles. And again, just picking out odd bits of specks of dust and things that just kind of float down. And I'm just moving my head around just to get different angles so that I can see. So here we can see that the box is all finished, it's all dry, it's glass-like, it's beautifully and shiny, there's no dust particles. I'm really happy with that. It did take a second layer, so it was sanded and re-poured, re-cured again, so it does take a very long time. So now what I'm doing is just picking off the tape, the green frog tape from around the edges. Don't leave this on there too long, the tape, because once the resin hardens and cures, it is like cement and it won't come off. So you've probably got about 48 hours to do, I would think. So there's a big pile there. You do end up with a few little annoying bits around the edge, and obviously they're best to take off. So I'm getting everything I can just with my fingers at the moment. Then I'm going to switch to just a little craft knife just to go underneath. So I just went round and whipped off any bits that I could find, gave it a quick sand, and now I'm just repainting the edges, again with the Dulux eggshell. And actually this was done 2 or 3 times, and I've just filled a few holes and any imperfections, and then obviously just let it dry in between each coat. It just gives it a lovely glossy finish. And meanwhile I've also painted the main body of the box, and there we are, ready to place the lid back on. I think it looks beautiful. I'm really pleased with this. So now we've just got to reattach the hardware that obviously we saved. So I'm just assembling all of the bits and just reattaching all of the bits. So looks like the last bits are going on now. That's the latch. And hopefully we should have a box that opens and closes, and I'll fill that with lots of lovely watercolour goodies for somebody. And there is a picture of the final box, and I'm absolutely delighted. It's yeah, it's beautiful, very subtle, very personal. It's the beach near where we live, and I'm delighted with it. So have a look on the website if you want to see any other boxes. They're all made exactly the same way. They all take about a week really to do because of the curing process. Any questions, get in touch. I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.